The wind had a cruel bite that November afternoon, whistling through the half-broken fence at the edge of Ethan Miller's property. The fields beyond lay bare and brittle, stripped of their color, and the old farmhouse that had once been the pride of his family now leaned into the cold like a man too tired to stand straight. Ethan had stopped caring much about how the place looked after his wife, Claire, passed. The shutters clattered in the wind, paint peeled from the porch railings, and the garden she used to love was now a tangled mess of dead stems and frost-bitten weeds. He had meant to fix things, to keep the place alive the way she would have wanted, but grief had a way of turning intentions into ghosts. He was carrying in the last load of firewood when he saw movement near the tree line. At first he thought it was an animal, a stray dog maybe, but the shape was too upright. He squinted, the dull winter light forcing him to shade his eyes, and realized it was a woman. She was stumbling more than walking, clutching something in her arms. 3 small figures trudged behind her, bundled in mismatched clothes that didn't seem to be doing much against the cold. The wind caught the edge of her coat, revealing thin arms and torn fabric. Ethan's first instinct was wariness. Out here, miles from town, strangers didn't just appear unless they were lost or desperate. He set down the wood and started toward the gate. The woman stopped a few yards away when she saw him coming, her breath visible in short, frantic bursts. "Please," she said, her voice trembling but steady enough to hold his attention. "We need help." Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into her face. She was young, maybe in her early 30s, but life had clearly taken more than it had given. The children, 3 small boys, all looking about the same age, stood behind her, their cheeks flushed red from the cold, lips cracked, eyes wide and uncertain. Triplets, Ethan realized, though one was slightly taller than the others. They looked like little ghosts in oversized coats. "What happened?" he asked, trying to keep his tone calm. "Our car broke down a few miles back," she said, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting it to still be visible through the trees. "We were trying to get to town, but we've been walking for hours. They haven't eaten since last night." Ethan hesitated. He wasn't used to company anymore. The silence of his house had become something like a second skin. But the sight of those kids, shivering, trying not to cry, stirred something in him he hadn't felt in a long time. "Come inside," he said finally. "You'll freeze out here." The woman's shoulders sagged in relief. She motioned for the boys to follow, and they trailed behind Ethan up the uneven porch steps. Inside, the house was dim but warm from the fire he had kept burning in the stove. The smell of smoke and pine filled the room, along with a faint trace of dust. He hadn't expected guests, but he cleared off the couch and gestured for them to sit. The triplets huddled together like a litter of kittens, watching him with wary eyes. "I'm Ethan," he said, setting another log on the fire. "Lydia," she replied softly. "And these are my boys, Caleb, Noah, and Eli." The names sounded fragile, like they belonged to someone still learning the world. The boys murmured polite hellos. Ethan went to the kitchen and rummaged through his pantry. There wasn't much, some canned soup, bread, and a bit of venison stew he'd made the night before, but he warmed what he had. The smell brought life back into the room. Lydia tried to protest when he handed her a bowl, saying he didn't need to go through the trouble, but he waved her off. The triplets devoured their food silently, occasionally glancing up at their mother as if afraid she might take it away. Ethan noticed how she ate last, making sure each of them had enough first. When the firelight softened the harshness of their faces, Ethan took a better look at them. They were beautiful kids, thin, yes, and clearly underfed, but their eyes were bright with curiosity. Lydia had that same brightness in her eyes, though it flickered beneath layers of fatigue and worry. There was something in her expression he recognized, something that mirrored his own sense of loss, though hers seemed more recent, more raw. "You're lucky you found this place," he said after a while. "Most folks don't come this far down the old road." "We weren't looking for anyone," she admitted. "Just trying to find shelter. I didn't even know there was a house here until I saw the smoke." He nodded. "Well, you can stay the night. Weather's only getting worse." Her mouth opened as if to argue, but then she closed it again and simply said, "Thank you." That night, Ethan set up blankets by the fire for the boys while Lydia took the small guest room upstairs. He hadn't used it since Claire's mother visited years ago, and it still smelled faintly of lavender sachets. He didn't know if Lydia noticed, but when she came down later to check on her sons, he saw her eyes glisten in the firelight. He sat in his chair, pretending to read a tattered newspaper while his mind spun in circles. Who were they really? What were they running from? He wanted to ask, but something in her posture told him she'd already been asked too many questions. So he stayed quiet. The next morning brought a pale sun that did little to cut through the cold. Lydia was already up, cleaning the dishes from the night before. The boys were sitting on the rug, playing with a set of wooden blocks that had belonged to Ethan's son, Sam. His chest tightened at the sight. Sam had been only 6 when he died, pneumonia, too quick to fight. Claire had never recovered, and neither had Ethan. The blocks had sat untouched for years, a silent monument to everything he'd lost. Seeing them in the hands of those triplets was like watching a wound reopen, but strangely, it didn't hurt the way he expected. There was life in their laughter, the kind that filled corners of the house long left empty. "You didn't have to clean," he said quietly, stepping into the kitchen. "I can't just sit here and do nothing," she replied, not looking up. "You already did more than enough for us." He wanted to say it wasn't a big deal, but it was. Having someone else in his kitchen, moving like she belonged there, stirred something unfamiliar, comfort, maybe, or fear of it. By midday, he'd managed to get her car towed up the drive using his old truck. The engine was dead beyond repair. "You'll need parts from town," he told her. "It's about 15 miles away." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I don't have much money left." "Don't worry about that now," he said. "You can stay here until we figure something out." She looked up sharply. "I can't just stay here. You don't even know us." Ethan shrugged. "You needed help. That's enough." For a moment, their eyes met, and in that silence was a strange understanding, two people broken in different ways, holding each other's pain without having to name it. Days turned into a week. Lydia insisted on cooking and cleaning to repay his kindness, though Ethan didn't ask for it. The boys filled the farmhouse with noise again. Footsteps on the stairs, laughter in the hallways, the occasional crash of something being knocked over. At first, it grated against the quiet he'd come to depend on. But slowly, the silence he once clung to began to feel like a burden he no longer wanted to carry. One night, after the boys had gone to bed, he found Lydia sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket and staring at the moonlit fields. He handed her a mug of coffee and sat beside her. "They sleep easy?" he asked. "Easier than they have in months," she said. "They've been through a lot." He waited, giving her space to continue if she wanted to. "My husband died last winter," she said finally. "He was in construction, there was an accident at the site. After that, everything fell apart. We lost the house, then the car started giving out. I tried to make it work, but," she trailed off, swallowing hard. "I didn't know where else to go." Ethan looked out into the distance, the memories of his own loss surfacing like ghosts in the frost. "I'm sorry," he said softly. She nodded, tears glistening on her lashes but refusing to fall. "I keep thinking if I just keep moving, it'll stop hurting. But it doesn't." "It doesn't," he agreed. "It just changes shape." They sat in silence after that, two weary souls watching their breath fade into the cold night. Something unspoken passed between them, a fragile thread that neither dared to pull too tightly. Over the next few weeks, Lydia began to breathe life back into the house in small, unexpected ways. She replaced the broken curtains with ones she sewed from old fabric, brought in pine cones and dried flowers for the table, and taught the boys to help Ethan with the chores. The triplets adored him, following him around the farm like ducklings. Caleb liked to hand him tools when he fixed the fence. Noah had a knack for storytelling, often spinning wild tales about knights and dragons while Ethan chopped wood. Eli, the quietest of the three, simply liked to sit nearby, content to watch. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself smiling without forcing it. He caught himself humming while feeding the chickens or fixing the barn door. The loneliness that had once felt like a second skin began to loosen. But beneath that growing warmth was fear, the fear that it wouldn't last. He told himself not to get attached, that Lydia and her boys would leave once the car was fixed or she found work. He even tried to distance himself, taking longer shifts at the lumberyard in town, coming home late. Yet every night when he returned, he'd see the glow of light in the windows, hear laughter spilling out from the kitchen, and something inside him would ache, not with sadness but with longing. One evening, when he came home later than usual, he found Lydia asleep on the couch, a book resting on her lap. The fire had burned low, casting shadows across her face. For a moment, he just stood there, watching her breathe. There was peace in her expression, a kind of quiet strength that reminded him of Claire, and yet, it was different. Lydia carried her pain like a lantern, lighting the darkness instead of hiding from it. He draped a blanket over her shoulders and turned toward the stairs, but her voice stopped him. "Ethan," she murmured, half awake. "Yeah." She opened her eyes slightly. "Thank you. For everything." He nodded, though she'd already fallen back asleep. Upstairs, in the room that used to belong to his son, he sat by the window and looked out at the fields. The moon hung low, silver and solemn. He thought about the last few years, the loneliness, the quiet despair, and realized that somehow, without him noticing, the house had started to feel alive again. He had started to feel alive again. The next morning, Lydia told him she'd been offered a cleaning job in town. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "We'll move into a small place once I save enough," she said, avoiding his eyes. "You've done more than enough for us." Ethan's heart sank, though he forced a smile. "That's good news. You deserve a fresh start." She smiled back, but there was hesitation in it. The boys, overhearing, immediately protested, saying they didn't want to leave. Ethan laughed it off, telling them their mother would decide, but inside he felt the sting of their impending absence like the slow closing of a door. That evening, as he watched them play in the yard, Lydia came up beside him. "They love it here," she said quietly. "They're good kids," he replied. "You've done right by them." She shook her head. "I'm just trying to keep us all standing." He turned to her, wanting to say something, anything, to make her stay, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he just nodded and looked back at the boys. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and gray. The triplets chased each other through the dying grass, their laughter echoing through the valley like a song of something long forgotten. Ethan realized then that even if Lydia did leave, they had already changed him. They had reminded him what it meant to care, to hope, to open a door again. And somewhere deep inside, though he didn't yet understand it, he knew this was only the beginning.